Good evening. It's 8 p.m. here, local time in Warsaw. I'm Diana Skaya, and you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. This evening, we'll focus on elections across Europe, but particularly on the elections held in Tbilisi, Georgia, where reports of irregularities and alleged rigging cast doubt on the process's integrity. Now, more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. A truck hits a bus stop in Tel Aviv, Israel, leaving one dead and dozens injured. Dutch football club honors Polish liberators of Breda. And Robert Lewandowski's brace helps Barcelona thrash Real Madrid. Now, even though the Georgian Dream has claimed its victory, many Western politicians have not recognized Georgia's results of the parliamentary elections. Neither has the country's president, Salome Zurabishvili. Now, following a meeting with the leaders of pro-European opposition parties, the president came out and said that Georgia fell victim to a Russian special operation. Now, the tensions are running high with huge protests expected tomorrow. We now go live to Ovidiusz Niceea, who's in the Georgian capital of Tbilisi. Good evening, Ovidiusz. So tell us, what evidence do the opposition and international observers point to when they say that this election was fraudulent by the government?
Right, so the Georgian president, standing in front of the opposition leaders, has said that yesterday's election was a total falsification, that the ruling pro-Russian party, the Georgian Dream, stripped the Georgian citizens of their constitutional rights. The opposition, but also international observers, have pointed out these issues about the election. It's ballot stuffing, bribery, voter intimidation, and violence near polling stations. That's why opposition leaders have refused their seats in the parliament, and that's why the president does not recognize the result of the vote.
What we witnessed was unprecedented. It was a complete falsification and theft of your votes using every available tactic we have seen both in other countries and in Georgia. Additionally, modern technologies were employed to cover up these manipulations, a level of deception we had not encountered before.
Now, the Georgian president said that this is a Russian special operation, but she did not specify what she meant by it. So after that statement, I asked one of the leaders of the Georgian opposition, Tina Bokuchava, and asked her what the president meant by saying this.
We know how Russian malign influence works, including in subverting electoral processes. And yes, we have all reasons to believe that the government of Georgia was working hand in hand in full coordination with Russian security services to subvert the will of the pro-European Georgian people at yesterday's historic elections.
Now, the OSCE did not link these violations to Russia, but they have planted a list of wrongdoings and violations. Let's take a listen.
Throughout the period, there were reports of intimidation, coercion, and pressure on voters, especially on public sector employees and the economically vulnerable. This raised concerns about the ability of some voters to freely form their opinions and cast their vote without fear. This is at odds with OSCE commitments and international standards. The ruling party enjoyed a vast financial advantage over all of its competitors, but public trust in the transparency and the effectiveness and impartiality of campaign finance oversight, including some of the activities of the new Anti-Corruption Bureau, was limited.
Now, the results that the official results here, these are not final. They are 99% of the votes are counted. They give 54% of the vote to Georgian Dream, and the coalition, the pro-European opposition coalitions each have about 10% of the vote. However, these are not, as we have heard, recognized by the opposition itself here. The big question is, whether countries around the world will recognize this vote. A list of parliamentarians from Europe and Canada have urged the European Union not to recognize these elections. There are also some senior politicians, such as the foreign ministers of Poland and Lithuania, who have said that they are watching the events in Georgia with concern and very closely. And the European Council President Charles Michel has said, has called on Georgian authorities to swiftly, transparently and independently investigate all the alleged election fraud. And regarding the protests, big protests are planned for tomorrow at 7 p.m. local time in front of the parliament here in Tbilisi, the Georgian capital.
That's right, Ovidiusz. Thank you so much from Tbilisi, Georgia. We'll closely be monitoring the events as they unfold. And now, staying on elections, Bulgarians are headed to the polls in early parliamentary elections, the 7th since April 2021. Now, nearly 5,000 candidates are vying for 240 seats in parliament. However, latest opinion polls show that no single party will win a parliamentary majority. Now, let's go live to our correspondent, Don Arleth, who is in Bulgaria's capital, Sofia. Good evening, Donna. What are the results? Take us through that.
Well, that's a good question. So the polls just closed about an hour ago. We have 22 parties plus 9 coalitions have been registered for these elections. You mentioned all the countless, the amount of candidates and what have you. The latest polls that I saw, according to the Bulgarian public broadcaster, was 26.4% for GERB. That's the center-right party that has been taking the majority in most of these snap elections. And then coming in second, 14.9%, the centrist anti-corruption party, We Continue the Change. And then coming in third is 12.9%, the far-right pro-Russian anti-EU Revival Party. So those are just exit polls. Of course, the first official results won't start pouring in until about midnight tonight. I think tomorrow you'll have a much clearer picture, but I think it's safe to say that, in fact, nobody will win with these numbers, of course, nobody will win an outright majority. And of course, they're going to go into negotiations then. If we look back at the last elections that happened in June, well, there were 3 attempts to form coalitions between then and now, unsuccessful. So with these numbers being really close to the polling, we shall see another attempt to try and form a coalition, but it looks like more snap elections are going to be ahead for the Bulgarians. We talked to some of the voters today and got a different perspective. I talked to a lot of people who said they weren't going to vote, but I also talked to the people that did in fact vote. And well, here is some of their thoughts.
I think the level of the political class in Bulgaria is very low at the moment. I think it's at its lowest point maybe in the last 30, 40 years. You know, throughout my conscious life, I have never seen such low quality politicians. Put it this way, yeah. In terms of education, in terms of the way they connect to the people, in terms of the way they take decisions, in terms of the way they see the country in 10, 20 years.
Okay, so I spoke about the actual third place that goes to the far-right, pro-Russian, anti-EU party Revival. They were thinking, there were some polls suggesting they might achieve second place, however they achieved third. And of course, I spoke to a local expert here, Ivan Anchev, earlier today, just about the Russian influence here in Bulgaria. And this is, well, this is part of the problem with the politics. And, well, here's what he told me.
And unfortunately, in Bulgaria, the pro-Russian political narrative is still very strong. We are really very much concerned on this raising Russian influence, not only in the Bulgarian politics, but in the Bulgarian economy, in the Bulgarian society, even in the Bulgarian government.
And so if looking at this result, it is concerning. I think that we can take note of this, that the Revival Party did or will do so well in these elections, coming in potentially third. Now also, Ivan also told me today that if we take all the different smaller parties and add them up to the ones that tend to be pro-Russian, combined, that actually makes up around 40% of the parties expected to win seats in parliament. So that is from one side concerning. However, from the other side, the chances of these parties being able to work together is very, very low. Now back to you.
Thank you so much, Don, for breaking it down for us. We'll be coming back to you throughout the evening. That's Don Arleth from Bulgaria. Lithuanians have also headed to the polls for the second round of their general elections. Now, the government may change, but will the country's stance on the EU, Ukraine, and Russia? Our Michael van Bloemsteen has the story.
Sunday's second round of the general elections has filled out half of the Lithuanian parliament. The goal of the Social Democrat LSDP was to hold on to their coalition's lead from the first round. Across the continent, far-right and Moscow-friendly parties have been doing well. But not in Lithuania. Here, pro-Russian voices have been firmly consigned to the margins. All the mainstream parties are staunchly pro-NATO and EU-oriented, even the right-wing populists. Whatever coalition is formed after the second round, policy towards Russia, Ukraine or the EU is unlikely to change drastically.
Here we would see very little differences, maybe about tactics, about timing, about the earmarking the money for different, say, defense sectors. But otherwise, there is a rather clear-cut consensus.
Few countries have as much experience with Moscow's yoke as Lithuania. In between heavily militarized Kaliningrad region and Russia's staunch ally Belarus, security was a hot campaign topic.
I really hope that the new coalition will be effective and united, and that it won't have differences of opinion in strategic questions for Lithuania.
The country has been firmly unified in supporting Ukraine and offering a haven for Russian and Belarusian dissidents. These include exiled Belarusian opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya.
Putin's Russia today is a dangerous neighbor. It's not just Russia, but Putin's Russia.
Experts believe Lithuania is less susceptible to Russian interference than most former Soviet states, even compared to the other Baltic countries.
But say in Estonia and Latvia, with the larger Russian-speaking population, the links to the Russian culture and the spheres of the Russian information and to a great extent the Russian propaganda, these people acquire different attitudes, but that's not the case in Lithuania.
The main differences between the parties lie in domestic and economic issues. Lithuania has seen some of the highest inflation numbers in the Eurozone.
Moving on to the Middle East, where a truck rammed into a crowded bus stop near the Gilot Israeli military base just north of Tel Aviv, leaving at least 30 people injured, with 10 in critical condition. Now, questions have arisen as to whether authorities will classify this incident as a terrorist attack.
Rescue workers reported that several individuals were trapped beneath the vehicle as medics and emergency personnel worked to free them. According to eyewitness accounts, civilians on site had fired shots at the driver in an effort to halt the vehicle, a detail later corroborated by local police. The truck driver, believed to be a Palestinian citizen from northern Tel Aviv, was gunned down at the scene. A police investigation is underway to determine the motive behind the incident.
We don't know whether it was a terror attack or not. This matter is currently being investigated by security forces and police.
We do know that the truck driver, is an Arab Israeli who lives in the city about a half an hour, 45 minutes away from here.
Incidents involving Arab suspects are often quickly labeled as potential terrorism in Israel. This problem has become particularly widespread since the events of October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched a mass terrorist attack against Israeli civilian population.
Today, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski is in Breda, Netherlands, honoring the 80th anniversary of the city's liberation by Polish forces in World War II. Now, the city, its people, and its football club share a profound connection to Poland, rooted in the sacrifices made during the war. Yaman Al-Helou has more in his report.
Breda, a Dutch city with profound respect for Poland.
This anniversary is an opportunity not just to honor the Poles who fell fighting to liberate this beautiful town, but also to thank the Dutch authorities as well as NGOs for upholding the memory of these fallen Poles, of the brave soldiers who brought freedom.
At the event celebrating the liberation of the city, Polish soldiers fired their rifles into the air, paying tribute to their predecessors. In 1944, the city was under German occupation when the 1st Polish Armored Division, commanded by General Stanisław Maczek, advanced toward it. On October 29th, Polish troops launched a decisive assault, successfully liberating the city from Nazi control, all while avoiding artillery fire to prevent the destruction of the city.
In Breda, we owe our freedom to General Maczek and his troops, but not just our freedom, also our historic city, which thanks to his strategy was not destroyed, but liberated door to door.
101-year-old Captain Eugeniusz Niedzielski is believed to be the only member of the brigade still alive.
I barely remember anything of what we did, because my orders were to drive my tank. The lieutenant sat at top, and he would tell me where to go through the intercom, left, right, ahead or back. I was basically blind. I could not see where I was going. They were guiding me. It's difficult to explain to people what I remember from the war. I only remember driving my tank.
Every year, the city's football club, NAC Breda, celebrates this anniversary. Captain Niedzielski kicked off their match on Saturday. In the stands, the team's supporters held a huge tifo with the words "We Remember" in Polish, created from scenes of the city's liberation. The presence of the Polish foreign minister today only adds to the tribute. He is believed to be one of his party's top choices to become a presidential candidate for the 2025 elections. However, the Civic Coalition, the biggest party in the ruling bloc, still hasn't officially named its candidate.
Climate change remains one of the most pressing subjects of the current political landscape, with officials struggling to agree on a set solution. Today, TVP World's Warsaw debate will tackle the shape and effectiveness of climate change policies. Stay tuned for the episode's premiere at 9:10 p.m. on TVP World. Polish football star Robert Lewandowski bagged 2 goals, leading his team, FC Barcelona, to a whopping 4-0 win over their biggest rivals, Real Madrid. Piotr Maszczuk has this report.
Lewandowski shone bright in Madrid as he netted a pivotal brace within a matter of just 2 minutes early in the second half of the game. His performance was instrumental in securing Barcelona's resounding victory over their Madrid-based rivals.
In this season, Robert Lewandowski is scoring more goals, even more goals than during his best season in his career. So right now he's playing maybe the best football that he has ever played, and that's a remarkable achievement since he's right now 36 years old, and normally players of this age are not supposed to be in the peak of their careers.
Lewandowski's performance has vastly improved under Hansi Flick, who also coached the Polish star at his previous club, Bayern Munich. When Flick was at the helm of the German team in 2020, Lewandowski won his only Champions League title, the most valuable silverware in club football competitions. Now, Flick has built a team that will attempt to repeat this remarkable feat.
Robert shows his quality in front of the goal, so it was very good for us to score the first 2 goals. But at the end, it's always about the team, and they really defend well, and also they attack well as a team, and this is for me the important thing.
By way of the crushing victory, Lewandowski's Barcelona comfortably sits 6 points clear of Real Madrid atop the league table. For Lewandowski personally, it's the best performance at an El Clásico, which is a popular name for games between Barcelona and Real Madrid.
The El Clásico that Lewandowski has played was, I believe, one of the most impressive performances of his career, because Lewandowski has become a hero of the biggest game in the football club league world, which which no other Polish player can say.
Lewandowski's Barcelona are on a remarkable run. Before the crushing victory over rival Real Madrid, they also thrashed the Polish striker's former club Bayern Munich 4-1 in a Champions League clash, with Lewandowski scoring one of the goals.
And now let's turn our attention back to the recent elections in Tbilisi, where reports of irregularities and accusations of election rigging have cast a shadow over the integrity of the process. Now, the Georgian opposition claims that the election was stolen, with the ruling Georgian Dream party that has aligned itself with Russia has secured a parliamentary majority for a fourth consecutive term. Now, allegations of election irregularities were confirmed on Sunday by international observers, and the opposition has called on Georgians to protest. Now, joining me now to discuss these developments in Georgia as well as in Bulgaria, I'm joined by Maria Semyonova, head of Sofia office at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Good evening, Ms. Sofia. Thank you so much for being with us here on TVP World this evening.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Now, really, elections taking place across Europe and in the South Caucasus, but let's start with Georgia first. Now, the first and most important question here. Many claims that this election was rigged, reports of voter intimidation, violence among the few issues. Could you share your perspective on the validity of these claims? Were these elections conducted fairly and freely?
Many election missions, have came up with statements that there was concerning voting intimidation in Georgia during yesterday's vote. So there are quite a lot of statements according to which the voting process was not implemented in the most transparent and just way. But it is important to mention that those elections were very important for the future of Georgia. There was a very high geopolitical stake, and the framing of the elections were whether Georgia will continue its EU integration path or it will turn to Russia and to closer cooperation with Moscow. And apparently the win of the Georgian Dream, the current ruling party there, raises concerns among the very pro-European Georgian population, which, as we saw before the elections, in the weeks before the elections, but not only, has been on the streets and pushing for this EU integration course of the country. And this is how the majority of the Georgian people sees the future of the country.
Now, the Georgian Dream Party, like you just mentioned, has suggested that voting for the opposition could destabilize Georgia and potentially lead to conflict and a war with Russia. Of course, this is something that definitely many Georgians are pretty sensitive about. Now, they stuck to this narrative that managed to gain support about stability and peace. Now, how do you respond to Georgian Dream's portrayal of opposition parties as a risk to national security? And essentially, how do you interpret Georgian Dream's victory in this particular context?
If you take a look at all the elections taking place in the world, unprecedented number of elections in the world, but very important elections here on our continent and for the Eastern Europe region and the wider Black Sea region, if you see the many far-right parties, populist parties, are betting on the peace rhetoric, on nationalism explained through cultural uniqueness, cultural identity. So this is a new narrative, given that the geopolitical context is quite dynamic and tense, and Europe is united in condemning Russia's aggression. But there is another narrative that those parties that want to drift away their country's future from the European Union family, they use this. This is the peace rhetoric. This is, a rhetoric that tries to kind of talk about fear of war, and they represent themselves as the only ones that can bring peace and prosperity. And they try to, portray Europe and the West as fueling the war in Ukraine. And of course, this is a rhetoric that plays very well in the hands of the Kremlin. But just to make a comparison, even within the European Union, this is what we are seeing in Hungary. We've been seeing this for many years in the rhetoric of Prime Minister Viktor Orban. We are seeing this in the Czech Republic, where the far-right parties recently marked the win at local elections. We are seeing this in Slovakia, and we are seeing this, of course, in Bulgaria among the far-right parties, but also parties that are kind of prioritizing the peace rhetoric, as I said, similarly to the one in Georgia.
Right. I mean, Russian officials, you had Margarita Simonian even post something on Platform X congratulating Georgia for that. Now, you mentioned fear. Let me ask you something. Opposition leaders are calling for protests. Do you think that demonstrators could significantly impact the political landscape, and can these results be challenged, or would they be able to destabilize the country?
To be honest, given the high stakes, given that Russia is apparently kind of harnessing very tough measures for election meddling, and I'm saying this because last week in Moldova there were elections and there were many accusations that Russia was interfering in the elections in Moldova. So if Russia is pushing so hard on NATO's eastern flank, on trying to influence the election results in these countries, we shouldn't exclude a situation where people go on the streets to protest, but then we don't know what the reaction will be by those forces, political forces in the countries that are highly dependent on Russia and that are influenced by the Kremlin.
Let's move on to Bulgaria, Ms. Sofia. Now, to our understanding now, the exit polls are in. What does this mean, of the parliamentary elections? Now, take us through those results, and how might they shape the country's political landscape moving forward?
We just voted for the 7th time for a little over than 3 years at the snap general elections. We are in an unprecedented political crisis. It's already a political crisis. The difference today is that we're going to see more political parties in the next 51st parliament. And this wasn't the case during the past 6 general elections. Those new parties that will make it to the parliament, most likely because the votes are still being counted, we're going to see 7 or 8 parties in the 240-seat parliament. So most of them were born out on populist rhetoric and on rhetoric benefiting from political turmoil and the inability of the mainstream and status quo parties to mobilize their electorate. So I think that the fragmentation will even increase in the Bulgarian parliament, and this is already very strong among the Bulgarian society, because the small new parties that we make it to the National Assembly, they don't have clear, comprehensive political programs, and this will be damaging for the political process. This will be damaging for the attempts to form a stable, regular government. And it will be damaging for the public debate, because the Bulgarian citizens are being more and more deprived of participating effectively in such a public debate that involves geopolitics, that involves the challenges in front of Europe, and Bulgaria is inevitably being influenced by all these events.
And to see how this will definitely unfold. Maria Simeonova, head of the Sofia office at the European Council on Foreign Relations, thank you so much for your input here today on both the elections in Georgia and in Bulgaria. Thanks for being with us here on TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
And that's all for this edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.